Million years ago, Earth was a very different place from the world we know today. There were no oceans, no forests, no mountains, and no living creatures. The planet that would eventually become home to billions of species was, at that time, a hostile world of fire and molten rock. Volcanoes erupted constantly. Asteroids crashed into the surface, and the sky was filled with thick clouds of ash and gas. Yet despite its violent appearance, this young planet was beginning a journey that would eventually lead to oceans, forests, dinosaurs, and, much later, human civilization. To understand how that happened, we must travel back to the very beginning of Earth's story. The history of Earth started a scam of blood and full, open grass, beginning to watch more and more, within a vast cloud of gas and dust. For millions of years, this cloud remained relatively unchanged. Then gravity slowly began pulling the material together. As more and more matter gathered, the cloud started spinning faster, forming a giant disk around a bright and growing center. At the heart of this disk, temperatures increased dramatically until a new star was born. That star became our sun. Around the young sun, countless fragments of rock, ice, and metal continued orbiting through space. These fragments constantly collided with one another. Some broke apart, while others merged into larger bodies. Over millions of years, these collisions gradually created the planets of the solar system. Among them was a growing rocky world that would eventually become Earth. During its earliest years, Earth was an extremely dangerous place. The planet was still forming, and every major collision released enormous amounts of energy. Much of the surface remained covered in molten rock. Giant lava fields stretched across the landscape, while volcanic eruptions continuously reshaped the young world. If someone could have observed Earth from space during this period, it would have appeared as a glowing sphere surrounded by clouds of ash and vapor. The early solar system was also crowded with leftover debris from planet formation. Asteroids and other rocky objects frequently struck Earth. Some impacts were relatively small, while others were powerful enough to melt large portions of the planet's surface. Scientists believe this period of intense bombardment lasted hundreds of millions of years and played an important role in shaping Earth's early development. One event during this era may have changed Earth's future forever. According to the leading scientific theory, a young planet about the size of Mars collided with Earth. Scientists refer to this lost world as Theia. The impact was so powerful that enormous amounts of rock were blasted into space. Over time, gravity pulled much of this material together, forming a new object that began orbiting Earth. That object became the Moon. Today, the Moon feels like a permanent part of our world, but there was a time when it did not exist. Its formation had a profound effect on Earth's future. The Moon helped stabilize the planet's rotation and influenced the tides that would later shape Earth's oceans. Even billions of years later, it remains one of the oldest visible reminders of our planet's violent beginnings. As time passed, Earth slowly began cooling. The vast oceans of molten rock gradually hardened, forming the first solid crust. Volcanoes continued releasing huge quantities of gases into the atmosphere, including water vapor, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. Although the atmosphere looked very different from the one we know today, it marked the beginning of an important transformation. Eventually, temperatures dropped enough for water vapor to condense into clouds. Rain began falling across the planet. Scientists believe this process may have continued for millions of years. The rainfall slowly filled low regions of the surface, creating the first oceans. For the first time in Earth's history, liquid water covered large portions of the planet. This was one of the most important turning points in Earth's story. The world of fire was becoming a world of water. Earth now possessed a stable surface, an atmosphere, a moon, and vast oceans. The foundations of the modern planet had finally been established, yet the oceans remained empty. The land was barren, and life had not yet appeared. The stage was set, but the greatest chapter of Earth's history was still waiting to begin. Somewhere within those ancient oceans, the conditions for life were slowly coming together. And in the next chapter of our story, we will explore how the first living organisms appeared on Earth and began a journey that would eventually transform the entire planet. By the time Earth's first oceans had formed, the planet looked very different from the fiery world of its youth. Vast stretches of water covered much of the surface. Volcanoes still erupted frequently, and the atmosphere remained thick with gases, but the endless oceans provided something the young Earth had never possessed before: stability. For millions of years, rain continued falling, rivers carved through newly formed rock, and the oceans gradually became deeper and larger. Although the planet still appeared hostile by modern standards, an important change was taking place. The conditions necessary for life were beginning to emerge. Scientists do not know exactly how life first appeared on Earth. In fact, it remains one of the greatest mysteries in science. There was no witness to the event, no fossil recording the precise moment when non-living chemistry became living biology. Yet evidence suggests that sometime around 3.8 to 4 billion years ago, something extraordinary happened within Earth's ancient oceans. Simple chemical compounds began interacting in increasingly complex ways. The early oceans contained water, dissolved minerals, and chemicals released by volcanic activity. Lightning storms frequently crossed the sky, while energy from the young sun reached the planet's surface. Deep beneath the oceans, hydrothermal vents released hot mineral-rich water from Earth's interior. Together, these environments may have provided the ingredients necessary for life to begin. At first, the earliest life forms were incredibly simple. They were microscopic organisms, far too small to be seen without modern instruments. They possessed no eyes, no limbs, and no complex organs. Yet despite their simplicity, they represented one of the most important developments in the history of the universe. For the first time, matter on Earth had become alive. These tiny organisms lived within the oceans and gradually spread across different environments. They consumed chemicals from their surroundings and reproduced themselves, passing their genetic information to future generations. Over millions of years, natural selection began shaping life. The organisms best suited to their environment survived and reproduced, while others disappeared. Slowly, life diversified and adapted to different conditions. Although these changes occurred at an almost unimaginable pace, they laid the foundation for everything that would follow. For billions of years, Earth remained a world dominated by microscopic life. There were no animals swimming through the oceans and no plants growing on land. The planet's surface would have appeared largely empty to a human observer. Yet beneath the water, countless microorganisms were quietly transforming the world. One group of organisms would eventually change Earth's future forever. These organisms were capable of photosynthesis. Using sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide, they produced energy while releasing a gas that had previously been rare in Earth's atmosphere. That gas was oxygen. Today, oxygen feels ordinary. Every breath we take depends upon it. But for much of Earth's history, oxygen was almost completely absent. As photosynthetic microorganisms spread through the oceans, oxygen slowly began accumulating. At first, much of it reacted with dissolved iron and other materials in the water. Over time, however, oxygen levels gradually increased. This event became known as the Great Oxygenation Event. It was one of the most important turning points in Earth's history. The atmosphere was changing, the oceans were changing, and life itself was changing. Many organisms that had evolved in oxygen-free environments could not survive these new conditions. Entire groups disappeared, while others adapted and thrived. In this way, oxygen became both a challenge and an opportunity for life. As millions of years passed, the atmosphere slowly began resembling the one we know today. The sky became clearer, the oceans became richer with life, and the foundation for more complex organisms was finally being established. Yet Earth still looked nothing like the modern world. The continents were barren and lifeless. No forests covered the land. No animals walked across the surface. No birds filled the skies. Life remained almost entirely confined to the oceans. But that would not remain true forever. Deep within those ancient seas, evolution continued its slow and patient work. New forms of life appeared. Organisms became increasingly complex. The biological foundations of future ecosystems were quietly taking shape. The next great chapter in Earth's history was approaching. A chapter that would eventually fill the oceans with strange creatures and prepare the world for the rise of animals. Around 500 million years ago, life on Earth had already been evolving for an incredibly long time. For billions of years, the oceans had been the center of all biological activity. Countless organisms lived beneath the waves, adapting to changing environments and slowly becoming more complex with each passing age. The continents, however, remained largely empty. Although Earth now possessed oceans, rivers, mountains, and an oxygen-rich atmosphere, the land itself was still a barren world of rock and sand. No forests covered the landscape. No animals roamed across the surface. No insects buzzed through the air. Compared to the thriving oceans, the continents seemed almost lifeless. Yet this situation would not last forever. Over millions of years, some forms of life began adapting to conditions near the shoreline. Certain microorganisms and simple plant-like organisms found ways to survive in damp environments where land met water. These early pioneers faced challenges that life in the oceans had never encountered. Water helped support the weight of marine organisms, protected them from drying out, and provided a stable environment. On land, those advantages disappeared. Sunlight was stronger. Temperatures changed more dramatically. Water could quickly evaporate. Any organism hoping to survive outside the oceans needed entirely new adaptations. Despite these difficulties, life gradually expanded into these unfamiliar environments. The earliest land plants were very simple compared to the trees and flowers we know today. They were small and lacked many of the structures found in modern plants. Yet their arrival marked one of the most important moments in Earth's history. For the first time, life was beginning to transform the continents. As plants spread across moist regions of land, they slowly altered the environment around them. Their presence helped stabilize soil and created new habitats for other organisms. Over millions of years, plants became larger and more diverse. Simple forms gave rise to more complex varieties. New species appeared. The green color of life gradually spread across parts of the ancient world. At roughly the same time, some animals also began exploring life beyond the oceans. The earliest visitors were small invertebrates related to creatures that already lived in shallow coastal waters. Their journeys onto land were modest at first, but they represented the beginning of an extraordinary transition. Generation after generation, natural selection favored organisms that could survive for longer periods outside water. Slowly, evolution produced new adaptations. Bodies became better suited for movement on solid ground. Protective coverings helped reduce water loss. Respiratory systems improved. What began as occasional visits to land gradually became permanent residence. By around 400 million years ago, Earth's continents were becoming increasingly alive. Plants spread farther inland. Early forests began appearing. Rivers flowed through landscapes that now contained living ecosystems. The world was changing in ways that would have seemed impossible only a few 100 million years earlier. Among the most important developments of this period was the evolution of the first forests. Ancient trees rose above the landscape, creating environments unlike anything Earth had previously known. These forests played a major role in shaping the planet. They influenced weather patterns, they altered the atmosphere, they created new habitats for countless organisms, and they transformed once barren continents into thriving ecosystems. As plant life expanded, animal life followed. Early insects appeared. Small creatures moved among the vegetation. New food sources created new opportunities for survival. The complexity of life continued increasing. Every major change opened the door to countless others. Meanwhile, Earth's continents continued moving slowly across the planet's surface. Mountains formed and eroded. Oceans expanded and contracted. Entire regions changed over millions of years. Yet through all these transformations, life continued adapting. By the end of this chapter, Earth had become almost unrecognizable compared to the world of its distant past. The barren continents were gone. Forests covered large areas of land. Rivers flowed through living landscapes. Animals had established themselves beyond the oceans. The foundations of future ecosystems were now in place. Yet even greater changes lay ahead. The age of giant forests was approaching. New groups of animals were evolving, and somewhere in the distant future, a lineage of creatures would emerge that would eventually dominate the planet for more than 150 million years. The age of the dinosaurs was still far away. But the world that would one day belong to them was slowly taking shape.
By around 300 million years ago, Earth had become a world filled with life. The barren landscapes of the distant past have largely disappeared. Vast forests stretched across many regions of the planet.
Rivers flowed through dense vegetation, and countless species occupied environments that would have been impossible only a few 100 million years earlier. Yet Earth was still very different from the world we know today. The continents occupied different positions, the climate was different, and many of the animals that lived during this period would seem strange to modern eyes. One of the most remarkable features of this ancient world was the size of some of its creatures. Scientists believe that oxygen levels in the atmosphere were significantly higher than they are today. These conditions may have allowed certain animals, particularly insects, to grow much larger than their modern relatives. Dragonfly-like insects with wingspans exceeding 2 feet glided through the air. Giant millipede-like creatures moved across the forest floor. Strange amphibians lived near rivers and swamps. The Earth of this era was a fascinating and unfamiliar place. Over time, the continents continued drifting across the planet's surface. Eventually, many of them merged together to form a single enormous landmass known as Pangaea. For millions of years, much of Earth's land existed as one giant supercontinent. This event dramatically changed global climates and ecosystems. Some regions became dry and harsh. Others remained humid and fertile. Species adapted to these changing conditions, while new forms of life continued evolving. Among the most important developments during this period was the rise of reptiles. Unlike many earlier animals, reptiles possessed adaptations that allowed them to live farther from water. Their eggs could survive on land, giving them an advantage in increasingly dry environments. As millions of years passed, reptiles diversified into many different forms. Some remained small, others grew larger. and slowly they began spreading across the supercontinent. Then, around 252 million years ago, Earth experienced one of the most devastating events in its history. Scientists call it the Permian mass extinction. It was the largest extinction event ever known. The causes remain complex, but enormous volcanic eruptions likely played a major role. These eruptions released vast amounts of gases into the atmosphere, altering the climate and affecting ecosystems around the world. The consequences were catastrophic. Many species disappeared forever. Entire groups of organisms that had dominated Earth for millions of years vanished. Scientists estimate that around 90% of marine species and a large percentage of land species became extinct. For a time, life on Earth faced one of its greatest challenges. Yet, life survived. It always had. And over the millions of years that followed, the survivors slowly began rebuilding the planet's ecosystems. New species emerged, new environments formed. And among the creatures that benefited from this changing world were a group of reptiles that would eventually become some of the most famous animals in Earth's history. The first dinosaurs. At first, dinosaurs were neither enormous nor dominant. They were relatively small animals, living alongside many other species. Nothing about them suggested they would one day rule the planet. Yet evolution continued its patient work. Generation after generation, dinosaurs adapted to changing environments. Some became faster, others became larger. New species appeared across different regions of the world. Meanwhile, Pangaea slowly began breaking apart. The giant supercontinent separated into smaller landmasses, creating new coastlines, climates, and habitats. These environmental changes provided new opportunities for life. Dinosaurs expanded into many of them. Over millions of years, their numbers increased, their diversity increased, and their influence on Earth's ecosystems grew steadily. By the end of this chapter, the stage was set for one of the most extraordinary eras in natural history. The age of dinosaurs had begun. For the next 150 million years, these animals would dominate the planet, evolving into forms both gigantic and spectacular. Towering herbivores would roam ancient landscapes. Powerful predators would hunt across vast territories, and Earth would enter a period unlike any that had come before. The world of giant dinosaurs was approaching. By around 150 million years ago, dinosaurs had become the dominant animals on Earth. They lived across vast continents, occupied countless environments, and existed in an extraordinary variety of forms. Some species were small enough to fit in a person's hand, while others grew longer than a modern bus and weighed many tons. For millions of years, dinosaurs thrived. Forests covered large regions of the planet. Warm climates existed across much of the world. Life appeared stable. Yet Earth has always been a world of change. Even during the height of the dinosaurs' success, events were unfolding that would eventually transform the history of life forever. As millions of years passed, the continents continued drifting apart. New oceans formed between them. Mountains rose and eroded. Climates slowly changed. Meanwhile, another group of animals quietly lived in the shadows. These animals were the early mammals. Compared to dinosaurs, they were generally small and unremarkable. Many lived hidden lives, avoiding larger predators and surviving on insects, seeds, and other small food sources. For a very long time, mammals remained a minor part of Earth's ecosystems. Few could have predicted that they would one day inherit the planet. Then, around 66 million years ago, one of the most famous events in Earth's history occurred. A large asteroid, estimated to be around 10 kilometers wide, entered Earth's atmosphere. Traveling at enormous speed, it struck what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in modern-day Mexico. The impact released an extraordinary amount of energy. The explosion was far greater than any volcanic eruption or human-made weapon. Shockwaves spread across the planet. Massive earthquakes occurred. Tsunamis crossed entire oceans. Debris was thrown high into the atmosphere. The consequences extended far beyond the impact site itself. Dust and particles filled the sky, blocking sunlight from reaching the surface. Temperatures dropped. Plant life struggled. Food chains began collapsing. The effects were felt around the world. Many species could not survive these rapidly changing conditions. Among the most famous victims were the non-avian dinosaurs. After dominating Earth for more than 150 million years, their age came to an end. Yet not all life disappeared. Many groups survived. Birds, which had evolved from certain dinosaurs, continued into the modern world. Various reptiles survived. Fish survived. Insects survived. And mammals survived. In the aftermath of the extinction, Earth entered a new chapter. The world left behind by the dinosaurs contained countless ecological opportunities. Habitats that had once been occupied by giant reptiles now stood largely empty. Over millions of years, mammals began expanding into these environments. Some adapted to life in forests, others moved into open grasslands. Some returned to the oceans, others developed the ability to fly. The diversity of mammals increased dramatically. As time passed, Earth's climate continued changing. Mountain ranges formed, ice ages came and went, forests expanded and retreated. The continents gradually moved closer to their modern positions. The planet was becoming increasingly familiar. Among the many groups of mammals evolving during this period was a lineage of primates. These animals possessed traits that would eventually prove important. They had forward-facing eyes, flexible hands, and large brains relative to their body size. For millions of years, primates evolved alongside countless other species. Most remained small creatures living among trees and forests. Yet evolution continued, generation after generation, age after age, slowly shaping the future. By around 7 million years ago, the ancestors of modern humans began following their own evolutionary path. The prior conditions worked later than said. There was no single moment when humans suddenly appeared. Instead, countless generations slowly changed over vast stretches of time. Eventually, early members of our own species emerged. For the first time in Earth's history, a creature existed that could study the stars, explore the oceans, and ask questions about the distant past. A creature capable of wondering how the world began. And that brings us to the end of our journey. From a young planet covered in molten rock, to the formation of oceans, to the appearance of the first life, to forests, dinosaurs, mammals, and finally humans. The story of Earth before humans lasted for more than 99.99% of our planet's history. Human civilization occupies only a tiny fraction of that immense timeline. Yet every mountain, every ocean, every forest, and every living thing around us carries the legacy of those ancient ages. The world we inherited was shaped by billions of years of change, a story written long before anyone existed to witness it. And even now, as you rest and listen, that story continues. The continents still move, the oceans still change, life still evolves, and Earth continues its quiet journey around the sun, just as it has for billions of years. And so, our journey through the history of Earth slowly comes to an end. From a world of fire and molten rock, to endless oceans, to the first simple forms of life, to vast forests, giant dinosaurs, and eventually the rise of mammals. Earth has spent billions of years becoming the world we know today. What is perhaps most remarkable is how little of that story includes us. If the entire history of Earth were compressed into a single day, human civilization would appear only in the final seconds before midnight. Everything that came before, the formation of the oceans, the rise and fall of ancient species, the movement of continents, and the age of dinosaurs, would occupy nearly the entire timeline. Yet those ancient ages are not truly gone. The rocks beneath our feet still carry their history, the oceans still reflect their origins, and every living thing on Earth remains connected to that distant past.
Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, take a moment to imagine our planet quietly traveling through space, a small blue world orbiting an ordinary star, carrying the legacy of billions of years of change. The mountains continue to rise.
The oceans continue to move, life continues to evolve, and Earth continues its long journey around the sun, just as it has for more than 4 billion years. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the world before humans. Now, let your thoughts grow quiet. Let the story slowly fade into the distance. And as the ancient Earth disappears beyond the horizon of time, may you find a peaceful and restful sleep.